Good afternoon or good evening if you're watching from Moscow or Europe. Welcome to the Scott Ritter Show. Let me start by wishing all the ladies out there a happy International Women's Day, and a polite reminder to the men out there, do your duty. Get the flowers, give them to the women who deserve them, who have earned them, and then everything will be okay. I'm glad everybody's joined in. You know, when you think about the situation between the United States and Russia, one of the things that comes to mind is Russophobia. And so I've been attracted to old Soviet movies, Russian movies, trying to watch them and take the lessons of Russian culture, et cetera, from them. And one of my favorite movies is Only Old Men Go Into Battle, and it's a wonderful story set in the Second World War. But it was colorized, and I was amazed to watch a movie that I had only known in black and white, and suddenly it comes to life colorized, and sort of admired whoever could come up with that, and found out that the gentleman who did that, Igor Lopatonok, is our guest today, and I want to welcome him here. First of all, thank you for doing that wonderful job on Only Old Men Go Into Battle, the colorization. It warmed my heart. Thank you for all your work. But what we're here to talk about today is your work on an even more important film, I believe, which is Ukraine on Fire, a film that you directed and was produced by Oliver Stone. Just as a way of background, it's a movie that I recommend every Russian area studies class in America today watch before they get into an in-depth discussion about the conflict in Ukraine. My daughter is a Russian area studies person, and we've had some very interesting conversations about the situation in Ukraine, and she has been heavily influenced by the prejudices that exist in American academic institutions. And I recommended that she watch that movie, Ukraine on Fire, and it changed her outlook. I'm not going to say it completely won her over, but it forced her to consider some very critical issues that otherwise were being ignored. And one of the main issues is the role of the far right, the right sector, Svoboda, and the role played by Stepan Bandera. So I'm hoping you'll be able to help me explore this topic today. And again, I welcome you to the show.
Hello, Scott. Hello, all audience. Happy International Women's Day for the beautiful better health. And thank you for inviting me. I would love to thank you for acknowledging my small input in the restoration of preservation of great culture of Russia and the Soviet Union. That's only old man goes to the battle. That was my first colorization work, and I very much admire. By the way, the movie now is popular both countries, Russia and Ukraine, what is like a natural bridge because we have these ancestors who sacrificed their life to fight the Nazi Germany and to win. And yes, in Ukraine on Fire, what we did with Oliver Stone, who helped me, who gave me a hand and believe in me and our ability to tell the story, and who actually forced me to direct the film, because I was a producer before, I never did directing job, but because of Oliver Stone, tell me, Igor, you Ukrainian, you understand that story better than anybody else. You need to go forward and you need to direct. I said, Oliver, I'm afraid. He said, don't worry, man, I will be with you. And he was not very happy with our first cut. He, metaphorically, he threw it in a trash can. And commanded together tomorrow with my editor, Alexis Chavez, with whom we collaborate for the 8 years now. And we did together with Oliver half hour of Ukraine on Fire as we know it now, and it's worked very well. I will not be bragging, but the film is gathered 387 million of audience around the world, was translated in 40 languages and have aged very well. That movie from 2013, 2016, and the release in 2016 is still very, very accurate and up to date because nothing changed for better in Ukraine. And yes, we explore the situation with influence of far right, and I don't think it's a right term in far right. I think the right term is a neo-Nazi, and the prominent Ukrainian nationalist radical movement of Bandera was chosen to be a flag, to be a monument and a basement to build all entire Ukrainian contemporary ideology on this. And that's led to horrible consequences. You see what we have in Ukraine now. We practically have a Reich, number 4. We have resurrected Nazi state when economy is broke, as only war economy exists, and will radical ideology consume completely minds of my fellow Ukrainians. Not all of them, but the most passionate part of society very much admire the idea of Stepan Bandera, Dmitry Dontsov, Andrew Melnik, and others. Let's talk a little bit who they was, that people. Who was Stepan Bandera? As the CIA acknowledged, because CIA keep very close hand on the shoulder of that people, they was ruthless anti-Semitic. They was a terrorist who reigned the reign of terror on the Poles, Jews, and native-speaking Russians, and also on Ukrainians during the war with Nazi and before that. Bandera's first criminal act was assassination, but organizing of assassination of Polish Minister of Internal Affairs, chief of police, and that's why he was caught and put in a prison. Second act, when he started collaborating with the Abwehr, that was a military intelligence in the Nazi Reich, and supervised by Abwehr, and they use his connections to Ukrainian partisan movement that call radical Ukrainians who want to separate Ukraine from Poland and who want to carve Ukraine out of Soviet Union and make it independent state, what actually was not a Stepan Bandera initial idea, because he also was influenced. He was influenced by the father of Ukrainian nationalism, Dmitry Dontsov, who actually copycat the Nazi ideology, Ukraine for Ukrainians, so on. And that's famous motto, "Glory to Ukraine, glory to heroes," was copycat from Nazi Sieg Heil Hitler. And they now so promoting this, so everybody, including the Nancy Pelosi here, using this copycat of Nazi motto in our capital. This is a disgusting feelings, especially to people who understand who was that people. But that people was ruthless. They killed and organized ethnic cleansing in the Ukraine and in Poland. For example, Mykola Lebedь, about whom we're talking in Ukrainian Fire, he was a man who was responsible for Volhynian massacre, and as thousands of people, tens of thousands of people was massacred in a very brutal way, just for one reason: to clean ethnically territory out of people who live in there. Also, Ukrainian nationalists, they was used as a Dylan-Wanger brigades in Belarus. They committed atrocities in Belarus as well, and Belarus was most suffered nation in the world because practically third part of population was exterminated. They use a complete brutalness. They gather the people in the villages in one big barn and burn them alive. And who tried to escape, they shot them with machine guns. So who influenced Bandera for that? It's very interesting how Ukrainian statehood emerged, because idea of Ukraine as an independent state was born in the Austro-Hungarian Empire. And the man who was behind that was a William Gabsburg, that family member of Gabsburg, who was rulers of Austro-Hungarian Empire. And he was number 16 in the heir. He will never reach the throne. And he decided to carve out of great Russian Empire piece, call it Ukrainian kingdoms, and proceed to be Ukrainian king. And you know what's interesting, Scott? What that man they meet with Bandera. When Bandera was a young guy, still in a PLAST organization, that's a Ukrainian nationalist youth organization, when they groomed them. And he was influenced by idea of William Gabsburg, who also has a second name, Vasil Vyshyvanny. Why Vyshyvanny? Because Ukrainians give him a shirt, and he was wearing the shirt under his uniform, and that was a Vyshyvanka. That's like embroidered shirts, what Ukrainians very proud to wear. That guy was, how to say, pretender on Ukrainian throne, and Bandera was very much when they split OUN and OUN Bandera and OUN of Melnik. It was a two fractions of this terrorist organization. Bandera was under influence of Vasil Vyshyvanny. He want to put him on the throne of Ukraine. He want to make him a king of Ukraine. We're going to talk about this in my next film, Ukraine, War and Peace. But don't make any doubts. Ukrainian radical nationalist movements was first, Nazi collaborators. Second, they was Nazi by ideology, because they sharing with Nazi idea of ethnic superiority. And third, they was a terrorist organization because they accept the terror as a way of achieving their political goals.
Well,
that's it.
Let me push back just a little bit, not because I believe it, but because this is the pushback I get when I make the exact same argument that you've just made. Scott, the interwar period between World War I and the Second World War was a very difficult time in Central Europe. There were a lot of nationalists rising up, and for the Ukrainians stuck between Hitler and Stalin, violence was their only option. And yet you can't blame the Ukrainians for using violence against violent people. That Stepan Bandera was a tool of Ukrainian nationalism, but not the symbol of Ukrainian nationalism. That Ukrainian nationalism is pure, and it rises above the violence and the hatred and the murder and the rape and the torture and the Nazi ideology. It's bigger than that. And you disgrace the Ukrainian people, you disgrace their nationality, you disgrace their history by seeking to define it only as a byproduct of Stepan Bandera. Where am I wrong on that? Or am I right?
First of all, this is a clear example of whitewashing of Nazi ideology, because people who saying that, they don't know Ukrainian nationalism. They don't study that nationalism as we did. They don't understand that the Ukrainian nationalists admire the violence altogether. Not only Stepan Bandera, every one of them. And even that contemporary Ukrainian nationalists who live and reside in the United States, they admiring the violence, they admiring the act of terror as a tool to fight for their vision of Ukrainian independence. First of all, Ukraine never was independent. Ukraine, even from the start, as understanding the nation, when the Kazakh Zaporozhye siege movement and Bogdan Khmelnytsky, they fight against Pole, they fight against Crimean Tatars, and after that, when they understand they cannot win, they find a much better and stronger ally, Russian Tsar from Moscow Duchess. And they come to him and practically beg to join Russia. And that was not an easy solution for the Russian Tsar, They do a lot of consultings. They make a decision very carefully, because joining Ukraine under the Russian protectorate and joining Ukraine to the Russian Empire mean for Russian war with Paul, immediate war. And they go to this war. And it was a 300 years, actually for anniversary of this 300 years, Nikita Khrushchev gave up Crimea as a gift to Ukraine. Such a stupid idea, because Crimea is such a Russian place of Russian dignity and Russian honor, because they fight, as you know, like Leo Tolstoy was fighting as an artillery battalion protecting the Sevastopol. So Ukrainian nationalists who whitewash in contemporary Ukrainian ideology, they never study principle of Ukrainian nationalism. They don't know how brutal that principles. They don't know that violence not only acceptable tool, but this is a desirable tool. They don't study that nationalism in details as we did. If they study that, they will never associate themselves with that brutality, with that inhumanity, and very clever, the fascist and Nazi ideology of superiority, one nation. And you know, that's giving them ability to call people living in Donbass subhuman. And this is not only, they brag in this, oh, it cannot be Nazi state because we have a Jewish president. Sorry, guys. First of all, during the World War II, in a Reich, that was a Nazi, even the Nazi working for SS. And that Nazi was a Jewish by nationality. You can speculate that even Adolf Hitler was a little bit of Jewish. It's not proved, but that theory exists. It's no immunity, no vaccine against the Nazi ideology if you're Jew. And as we see with the bright example of President Zelensky, who was gained his power on a pro-peace narration, who promised to country who was suffering under Poroshenko regime from endless war with their own people in Donbass, a promise to end this war. That was his clever promise. You know, we did a sequel to Ukrainian Fire called Revealing Ukraine. And we're releasing this in 2019, just when President Zelensky was inaugurated. And we used that footage of his inaugurational speech when he promising to stop the war on Donbass. You know, such an irresponsible man who gained to power on a pro-peace narrative, completely forget, completely betray his electorate and run a brutal war. And you know, I believe, Scott, that most important duty of the president, of the statement, that's protect their own people. And what's worst scenario you have for people? War. When your people, your nation is dying on the battlefield. And this is irreversible human losses. And also losses of their kids who never will be born. This is horrible for me. You know, this is disaster. As a Ukrainian, still holding Ukrainian passport, I never accept that man policy to run the war against the Russia. And I will never accept, I'm gonna fight against this regime until that regime gonna be done.
Well, let's talk about that for a second, because what constitutes that regime being done? You know, when we reflect on the situation in Ukraine today, you have a major avenue in Kiev named after Stepan Bandera. You have statues raised to Stepan Bandera. Stepan Bandera is the national hero of Ukraine, but even worse than all this, because those are symbols. I can rename a road. I can tear down a statue. I can redesignate. But the youth culture of Ukraine has been taken over by, I think it's called the Planck movement, scouting, which is the Bandera scouting organization. And the law that was passed requires every youth center to yield to the Planck movement, that Stepan Bandera's ideology will be infused into everything a child does in Ukraine, which means an entire generation is being brainwashed with the hateful, odious ideology of Stepan Bandera. So now the question comes, how do you denazify Ukraine? That's one of the stated objectives of the Russian government, denazification. I understand getting rid of Zelensky. I understand taking Sloboda and Right Sector, Azov, Aidar, and the other named nationalist units and putting them up against the wall. But how do you change the minds of children that have been infected with an ideology of hate?
Scott, this is a very good question, because as you understand, the battlefield, this is not the place when this war will be won. We need to win in minds. If we win in the minds, we win in the entire situation. It is completely not, that task is tremendous and is very hard to do. But I believe that we have a successful example in our history, what was a denazification of Germany. When Germany committed a lot of crimes, let's see how it's happened in Germany. First of all, the victory on the battlefield, and that's conditions what cannot be avoided. Victory on the battlefield. Second, it's a trial. It was in a Nuremberg, so you need to prosecute everyone. First row, the military crimes, who executed the people, who tortured the people, who committed atrocities. Second line, the people who was political leaders, who was a military, not only military, but who was a teachers, who was a lawyers, who was a judges, who allow and enable this regime, who not go on the street, who not raise the voice, who was participating in the committing of crimes. That's supposed to be trial. And after that, tens of years of education, forceful education, explaining to everyone from the kindergarten how bad is it, the Nazi ideology, how bad is Ukrainian nationalism, of course, banning all symbols, all works, everything what can remind and could brainwash the kids and plant that infection in their minds. And you know what, maybe I can suggest, this is only my speculation, my idea, what Ukraine need to find a different ideology leader, the hero from the past. And Ukraine have a lot of good people who was leading that. In one controversial figure, what actually can substitute in the mind of Ukrainians the role of Stepan Bandera. That was Nestor Ivanovich Makhno, the great mind and a great anarchist who was during the civil war in Ukraine fighting against Petlura and fighting together with Russians even against the White Army. He was, of course, betrayed by communists and ran to Paris, but you know, he was not only like the commander on the field, he was also a philosopher, he was a writer, and he has entire ideology accessible to substitute ideology of Western part and the radical part of Ukrainian nationalism. I believe something like that can be also used. But this is last things, it is my clear speculation.
Well,
but this is a long way.
I just watched another interesting old Soviet film about the, gosh, I'm going to mangle the name, but the adjutant of His Excellency, I think was the name of the film.
Yeah,
about the two comrades. But Makhno played the fighters of Makhno played a role in that film. So it's interesting that you brought this up. But here's again, I'm not pushing back against you. I'm just putting out a line of thinking. This is why I think denazification in Ukraine will be extraordinarily difficult this time. You see, correct. Adolf Hitler came into power as a minority. The ideology of National Socialism was a minority ideology. He used violence and such to leverage himself in threats, promises, and he came into power, based upon, I think, a misconception on many Germans that he wouldn't be as bad as he became. It difference between that and today, see, a lot of Americans, we're familiar superficially with the notion that Bandera was a neo-Nazi, was a Nazi sympathizer, that the Banderist organization during the Second World War collaborated openly with Nazi Germany. We're not so familiar with what happened from 1945 to 1952, this secret war that took place that was supported by the CIA, by British intelligence, by the Gehlen organization, which was the Abwehr that was taken over by the CIA to do just this task. This nearly decade-long war that cost the Soviet Union nearly 45,000 dead soldiers and security officials. It cost the Ukrainian people around 200,000 dead, and about 150,000 Western Ukrainians or Banderas fled the nation into diaspora around the world, where they are entrenched, solidly entrenched. Here in the United States, 60 miles away is Ellenville, with a Heroes Park with Bandera's statue. In Canada, the Banderists are open about what they do, and the Deputy Prime Minister is a Banderist herself, Chrystia Freeland. In Germany and Australia, the Banderist ideology is alive and well and living. So there's this festering, cancer of Banderism that exists outside of Ukraine. But inside Ukraine, about 150,000 Banderists were arrested, prosecuted, and sentenced to long terms in the Gulag. This was in 1953, 1954. In 1956, Nikita Khrushchev freed them, released them. There was no denazification. There was no deprogramming. These people still had their hateful ideology. They still had their hateful organizational structures, and they were supported abroad by the CIA and the Banderas in diaspora. In my understanding, in reading about this, these people insinuated themselves back into Ukrainian society, and they reached mid-level, in some cases senior level, in the Communist Party hierarchy, where they spread Banderist ideology, which became the cornerstone of modern Ukrainian national identity. So when we speak of denazification of Ukraine, it's not just about taking children into school and re-educating them. The entire society is infected. And even if you are successful in isolating and re-educating, the cancer exists overseas, in the United States, in Canada, in Germany, elsewhere, that will continue to try and infect and reinfect Ukraine. I just see denazification being a horrible problem for Russia with no easy solution. Am I wrong, or am I onto something?
You are completely right, but we have an amazing tool for this, what actually was not available to Germans. We have a common language with Ukrainians. We both speak Russians. Second, we have a common faith. We both practice in Russian Orthodoxy, Christianity, what's very different from the Western. And culture. We still have common culture, because the film, The Only Old Men Go to the Battle, that's practically admired by Ukrainians and by Russians, similar, because that was their ancestor who fight the Nazi regime together, all together as a union. And of course, Ukraine banned a lot of Soviet culture, but it's easy process to unban, and it's an amazing piece of culture what can be used to educate. Because you know why I'm not Bandera? Because I was born in Soviet Union, and this ideology of unity in my blood. Scott, is very interesting. I was visiting Australia in 2000 when during Olympic Games in Australia, and I was met with a local Bandera emigre. You know what they did? They asked me a few questions. First, if KGB still exists. I said, no, KGB not exist. And then, what instead of KGB? I call him SBU. Oh no, I'm not gonna back to Ukraine. I said, why? I kill a lot of people. And second, they give me tall like that pile of books, and on top of these books was a little brochure, what's called Tactic of Fighting with Tanks in a Mountain Area. Imagine this, in Australia in 2000, Tactic of Fighting with the tanks in a mountain area. that's what they did until 1953, when the KGB and fight them as a war. That was a war. But I believe in another Ukraine. Why I believe in another Ukraine? Look on a very, very bright example. Very, very opposition leader of Ukraine, Viktor Medvedchuk, was born in a family of Ukrainian nationalists in exile in Siberia. And he was educated, and he was never accepting Bandera ideology. He was all the time advocating, actually, and paid big price for that. He was detained, captured, detained, beaten, and tortured because of he not decline his principles. But he can do. A lot of Ukrainian members of parliament sweep the side like that, like Bogdan Khmelnytsky with the war with the Crimean Tatars and the Poles choosing the Russian side. But no Viktor Medvedchuk. So that's giving me understanding that is another Ukraine exists. Not Ukraine of Bandera, but Ukraine of Gogol, Ukraine of Kovpak, who was a great partisan movement leader, Ukrainian, who fight against Nazi and who win and win big. And others, Ukrainians, who was like, even Shevchenko and others whom they glorify and mythologize, they never was severe anti-Russians. The Grushevsky, who was a leader of and the first Ukrainian independent state, the governor, he said he advocating for peace with Russia because the big northern neighbor never will go away, will not disappear from the map. They need to accept the reality that Russia exists for 1,000 years and Russia will be here forever. And they need to understand. And you know what? As we interviewed Mr. Putin for Revealing Ukraine, he said very important message, what Ukrainians don't understand. We have a competitive advantages together as Russians and Ukrainians because we have a common language, we have a common culture, and we have a common faith. That can give us up to 10% of competition advantage with the West because we can use our common language to be more competitive. Look at Ukrainian economy. This is no economy. This is only war economy. Oh, it's very interesting. I was hearing about the problems with the artillery ammunition on the Russian side. But yesterday I read in American source that United States needed 6 years to refill our artillery shells of caliber of 155 because we practically send them all. We send the half of our javelins, our Stingers is disappear. So if, for example, China decide to fight with United States, what I not believe in 1%, one moment, they have big advantages because they have a shells and we are don't. And arming Ukraine will never be an answer for this war. Never will be solution. This is a totally different situation because arming against Nazi, this is one thing. And arming the pro-Nazi, this is a completely another stuff. But you know what, Scott? Unfortunately, our country, United States, was all the time benefiting from the war abroad. And keeping the war abroad, that was a goal, and that was a business for people like Victoria Nuland, Blinken, Biden family, and others.
Oh, you're 100% correct. I'm gonna shift gears just a little bit. You talked about the role that Russian culture, common culture, Soviet culture, can play in denazification and bringing Ukraine and Russia back together again. And I like that idea, but here's the question: can you find a way, or can you think of a way to help use Russian culture to break down the walls of Russophobia that exist in the United States today? I had a very interesting meeting with Anatoly Antonov, the Russian ambassador to the United States. We talked a long time about the problem of Russophobia and the problems that accrue from it. Right now there is an absolute freeze in relations, and one of the reasons why relations are frozen is that the average American doesn't think it's worthwhile to have good relations with Russia because they fear Russia. They're ignorant of Russia. They accept at face value everything they're told that's negative about Russia and the Russian leader. And it gets to the, and now the Ukrainian conflict has allowed some very ridiculous things to occur, such as the Metropolitan Museum of Art reclassifying Russian artists who date back to the time of Imperial Russia as Ukrainian artists. We see restaurants doing superficial things like renaming the classic drink, the Moscow Mule, as the Kiev Mule, by calling borscht the classic Ukrainian dish. I mean, this is superficial, but it's indicative of the kind of ignorance-based, knee-jerk stupidity that governs how America views Russia today. You're a cultured man. You're a man of film. Help me and help other Americans as we try to navigate this journey through Russophobia, so we can get to better know the Russian people. What can be done to help us? How can we use Russian culture to break down this wall of ignorance-based fear that's currently separating our two peoples?
Very good question, Scott. And I believe I have an answer. First of all, without changing of this administration in the White House, this is impossible because warmongers in church. I was listening to Donald Trump's speech in New Hampshire when he delivered, and he told very important things. We're gonna clean the warmongers out of the State Department. We're gonna clean everybody who's a deep state out of this endless war concept pushing, because it's very profitable. That's how this family is working. For example, let's look on it closely on Victoria Nuland and Robert Kagan family. Until they will be decide and define the policy, foreign policy of United States, that will be endless color revolution, endless tension growing, endless conflict initiation. Why? Because from these shells, what actually disappear from our shells, they profiting from every piece of military hardware what the American producers selling to American government. That's supposed to be changed. The latest president who tried to fight against the military-industrial complex and intelligence controlling the White House was JFK, and how it ended for him. They killed him. And by the way, who killed him? The Alan Dulles, who actually consumed practically entire intelligence organization of Third Reich and call it OSS, what we now know as a CIA, or practically the work of Nazi intelligence was done and can have a continuation in that ruthless agency of CIA. So without CIA dictate over the White House and over the mind of American president, there will be no such a settings as it now. So the CIA, deep state, military-industrial complex, and the change in administration regime supposed to be changed. And after that, we have chance for the Russian culture to work very well, first of all, and most important, with a conservative, Christian conservative. Because as a Christian conservatives and Russians, they're very similar. They sharing same values. They sharing same family values. They understand that's everything what American mainstream media saying to them about Mr. Putin is a bullshit. Because they was fed by that narration from 2016 to 2020, and that narration was called after that Russian hoax. They understand that's not a Putin vote for Mr. Trump, that they vote for Mr. Trump. And this is, I think, the biggest hope to change, to appeal exactly to that audience, to American conservative, who is very much admiring the Russian culture. And Scott, I believe we can promote Dostoevsky, but Dostoevsky is bigger than me and bigger than everybody alive. And people who are intelligent, they love Dostoevsky, they love Tolstoy, they love Russian culture, and they can visit Russia. The people who watch Ukraine on Fire asking me, if it's safe to visit St. Petersburg, because we read in the State Department announcement, do not travel. I said, you know what, I was in Russia for 3 months. That was completely safe for me. So if you want to go, just go, arrange everything and visit Russia. You will see how different reality from the mainstream media narrative. And you know, Scott, I believe as you, that truth can penetrate the walls of lie. The truth can go over because light is better than darkness. Light can make the darkness disappear. And we live in a very dark time. We live in a very dark time, very hard to survive and to stand that endless, you know, the stream of lies and manipulation. And actually all media, you know, now they push it, that idea that Nord Stream was blown up by pro-Ukrainian group. Oh, I know the name of this group. That's group called CIA.
You're 100% correct on that last point. You know, I mean, look, this is going to be a difficult struggle here in the United States. As you know, we're a far different society than the Russian society. We, in addition to having a segment of traditional Christian, you know, people that embrace traditional Christian values, we have a significant progressive population who have the same protections rights as everybody else under the Constitution, and we can't carry out a de-wokeism strategy similar to denazification. The woke are allowed to have their opinion. So we have an uphill struggle. We have to find a way to win them over. You know, and I think Russian culture is the way to do it. And I think you are a warrior in this cause. And I thank you very much for coming on this program. And I'm going to butcher a Russian phrase here. Forgive me if I get it wrong, but мы работаем, брат. We're working, brother. Let's get the job done.
Brother. Yeah.
Thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate your time and your insights, and I look forward to hopefully talking with you again at some time in the future.
Thank you, Scott. I'm a big fan of your work. Thank you for fighting. Thank you for keep working. This is important. Thank you. Have a very wonderful day.
Thank you very much. Thanks.
Goodbye.
Bye-bye. Well, that was a fascinating conversation. I hope everybody pays attention to the history that was provided today and the insights about Russian culture and the uphill struggle we all have to find a way to get the United States and Russia working on the same page, a page based upon shared values, shared goals, shared objectives, humanity, peace, culture, and we have work to do. Again, happy International Women's Day, and thanks for tuning in. Remember, knowledge is power.